4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 55th episode of the Atlas Society Asks. My name is Jennifer Anju Grossman. My friends know me as Jag. I'm the CEO of the Atlas Society. We are the leading nonprofit organization introducing young people to the ideas of Ayn Rand in creative ways like our animated videos, graphic novels, and of course our webinars. So today we are joined by John Mackey, a man who needs very little introduction, but before I even get into listing some of his accomplishments, I wanted to remind all of you who are joining us, watching us on Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Use the comment section to type in your questions. We promise we'll get to as many of them as we can. So John is someone I've known for a long time, actually, even before I came to the Atlas Society, when I was also in the food business at Dole Food Company. Of course, he is the co-founder and the CEO of Whole Foods Market. He has led the natural and organic grocer to a $13 billion Fortune 500 company with more than 370 stores, including, as of the past couple of years, one here in Malibu, and 80,000 team members in 3 countries. Whole Foods has been named by Fortune magazine as a best company to work for at least 16 consecutive years. John is, of course, a strong believer in free market principles. He co-founded the Conscious Capitalism movement, and he co-authored the New York Times best-selling book, Conscious Capitalism, Liberating the Heroic Spirit of Business, and more recently, Conscious Leadership, Elevating Humanity Through Business. We're going to talk a bit about those. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Jennifer. That information is several years out of date, so I'll make a quick correction. We're up to 21 billion in sales, 105,000 team members, and we were named one of the 100 best companies to work for 20 consecutive years. So business keeps changing and growing, and sometimes the research departments get old data.
Spectacular. Well, thank you for the correction. So John, let's start from the beginning. You grew up in Texas. You studied religion and philosophy at the University of Austin before starting your first health food store. What drew you to those subjects, and is there an alternate reality where John Mackey would have gone on to become, oh, I don't know, a pastor or a philosopher?
I did go on to become both of those, but just in the context of being an entrepreneur, which is my true calling. When you're very young, you try on different beliefs, you try on different lifestyles, try on different friends, you try on different potential life partners, and that's how you learn that's how you really learn who you are. So, but no, I self-identify as an entrepreneur because I wanted to do something in the world. I wanted to build something. I wanted to create something. I didn't want to just interpret the world or write about the world. I like doing that too. And I've written a few books and I've got a few more in me, but I don't think I would have been fulfilled just thinking and writing and trying to influence people. I wanted to take my ideas and put them into reality, create something with it. Building Whole Foods has definitely been challenging, but it's been so much fun. It's an adventure. I feel like my life has been an adventure, and it still is. And it seems to be getting better all the time.
What's your favorite part of your job? Visiting stores?
I do enjoy seeing the stores and connecting with team members, but also customers and suppliers. When they know I'm coming, they tend to wait for me to get a picture taken or sign a book or something. Um, but I like the creative part of business. I mean, that's, as an entrepreneur, that's what draws entrepreneurs to be able to create things. So giving feedback on stores and helping stores evolve and get better. I know that I still enjoy real estate a lot because that's when still every site that Whole Foods has ever done, I've always signed off on every single one of them, not by myself, but the team has. And we have a tremendous track record of success and avoiding a lot of mistakes by not picking bad locations that you'll be stuck with for many, 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 many years and pay lots of rent. And even if you close them down, you're still paying rent. So that's a very important decisions. I also really, really I just enjoy my team. I enjoy, at the end of the day, when you do something for 43 years, it is a labor of love. And I haven't done this by myself, obviously. I've done it with people that I love and care. I think it's a little bit like the kind of bonding that if you're in the Marines that you might have, and you come out and those are the people you're gonna be closest to the rest of your lives, and people that I've created Whole Foods with, and we built the company together, that I've done it for so many years. Those are the people besides my family that I'm closest to. That's the part that is deeply most fulfilling. It's the relationships and to do something together and build something together. I mean, it's not, you can see that at the Atlas Society. If this nonprofit is growing and you're doing that with a team and you're sharing in the successes and sharing in the setbacks as well. And that bonding, those connections, those relationships, they're deep and they're rich and they make life meaningful.
So in college, you were a democratic socialist, if I understand. Clearly, given the growing popularity of socialism among the younger generation, you were ahead of your time, yet you evolved to become a free market libertarian. What were the experiences, the teachers, or the writings that advanced your evolution in that direction?
I can't remember exactly who said this, but I think it's true. And it goes something like, by the time you're 21, you're not a socialist, then you don't have any heart. But if by the time you get to 30, if you still are, you don't have any brains. And I think that's true. I think that when you're adolescent and you're young, you look around at a world, if you've grown up in a family, if you've grown up in a loving family, then you have a background of being taken care of and being loved, and you don't understand why the whole world doesn't work that way. You get out and the world is competitive and people don't care about you particularly, and you project onto the society, gee, it ought to be like a family. We evolved as tribal animals where we did have more of a family type relationship with our tribe. And so people yearn for that. But humanity was also stuck in a tribal form and in small communities for a long time, and we didn't progress very much. We didn't create. Life was short. We didn't have I mean, you just go back 200 years ago, and 94% of the people alive lived on less than $2 a day. The average lifespan was 30. The literacy rates were over 88% across the world. It was a Hobbesian world of nasty, brutish, and short. So you look around and you think, gosh, some have so much and some have so little. When you're young and your heart goes out and you said, it doesn't seem to be fair. You don't know very much, and you project out onto the society. We ought to be more like a family, and we ought to share everything. So I think that's where socialism originates, and it's always attractive to the young who don't have self-esteem or may not have that much self-confidence or aren't sure what they're going to do in the world, where they fit in, whether they actually are going to be, unsuccessful in life. But then as you get older and you see how the amazing things that capitalism has done to bring humanity to a higher level, you let that go, because you can still be a caring, compassionate person and help other people. But trying to design a society, socialism doesn't work. It's been tried, 42 times in the last 100 years, and it's failed 42 times. And why the heck anybody that's rational would think, well, this time we'll make it better. It'll be different this time. It's just, they're crazy. It won't be. It'll be a disaster. And it doesn't matter who's doing it. It doesn't, it fundamentally doesn't work. And I mean, look at China now as this sort of hybrid society, but when they were purely communistic, they were a terrible poor with starvation and famine. And I mean, when I was a little boy, that you're supposed to eat all your food so that, they're starving people in China. And as they liberalized their economy more, they began to create more prosperity. Same thing with India, which went through decades and decades after World War II and after getting out of the British Empire, where they were socialists, and they were super poor. So you learn things as you go through life. And one of the things I learned is that socialism doesn't work, capitalism does. And we need more capitalism. And we have an unequal distribution of capitalism in the world, and that's why we have so much poverty still.
So yeah, you talk about why in the world would anybody want to try this again? It's failed dozens of times. It's caused untold suffering, and yet, here we are. It's like Groundhog Day.
Every generation has to learn their lessons for themselves, it seems. They don't. Most people they don't study history. They don't. I mean, they're not taught how to think clearly. They don't know how to be skeptical and question things, and they just believe the propaganda that's thrown out their way. When I debate young people that are socialists, and I've done it several times, they're incredibly ignorant about history, or they have some other they interpret American history now as just this tale of woe, of exploitation of the Native Americans, enslaving blacks, conquering Mexico. It's all just a narrative of shame. And the tremendous things that there are bad things that Americans happen in American history, to be sure. But that leaves out the tale of triumph, of progress, of economic progress, but also ethical, moral progress. We aren't the same nation we were 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago. America has made tremendous progress, and we're evolving, and we're becoming more awake, more conscious, more just more developed.
I think the other reason it's not just the historical illiteracy or the lack of critical thinking skills, it's the failure to defend capitalism, not just on consequential grounds that it leads to better results and to reduced poverty, but to defend it a priori on ethical grounds, that it provides an individual with self-ownership. It doesn't constrain the rights of others. And also, I think you're very generous that yes, there may be altruistic, idealistic impulses wanting to share, but I think that there is also a lot of envy, a desire for the unearned, which Ayn Rand, that's how she described greed, was a desire for the unearned, a sense of entitlement, a sense of victimhood. And I believe it's important to also call out those motivations. While
I totally agree. You're absolutely right.
So you in 2006, you've talked about Whole Foods as a labor of love. Well, you put your money where your mouth was and announced you were reducing your salary to $1 a year and donating your stock portfolio to charity.
No, not my stock portfolio. I donated my stock options.
Stock options. Okay, thank you.
I still own my stock, so I'm a wealthy man. I did not take a vow of poverty.
But that said, I've seen you travel very, very frugally. You don't live a lavish life. I mean, it's It doesn't seem to be the trappings of a material success in terms of how you have measured your progress in life. But I guess, the question is, would you want to see other CEOs following your example? Is there something wrong with wanting to work for money and to achieve wealth?
No, of course not. And I mean, just to clear the record, I mean, I'm a very wealthy man, and human beings are complex. We are both self-interested and we are also caring. We're both, and you can't understand human beings unless you understand the complexity of human beings. We have a lot of different motivations. We are not cardboard characters. We have a lot of different motivations. We have almost have a lot of different selves that express themselves through our lives. So no, it's fine to work for money. I mean, that's a very important thing. I mean, it's important that we support ourselves and we support our families, and we do that through work and saving and investing and living and consuming less than we earn. Ultimately, that's the real secret to wealth over time, is to reduce your spending, be beneath what you actually earn, save and invest the rest of it, and let compounding work its magic over time. I mean, I've read recently that Warren Buffett's net worth has increased. I mean, he's 90% of his total net worth has been created since he turned 65. So he was wealthy when he was 65, but he's far wealthier today because compounding just keeps working and working and working. And if you live a long time and you realize the power of investing and patience, then the compounding works for you as well. It is working for me. So I think working for money, I certainly work partly for money. I mean, remember, I still owned all of my stock, didn't own all my stock in Whole Foods, but I still owned, when I cut my pay to $1 a year, I gave my stock options to our foundations. I still, every year I got wealthier, is because the stock kept going up. So it was not, I just wanted to I was always being criticized for any kind of salary I took. So, I just took that off the table. The real wealth was being generated by creating value for the shareholders and for all the different stakeholders. And as we created more value for the shareholders, I was one of them. So I became wealthier as a result. But then again, being generous and kind and philanthropic, that's part of who I am as well. I'm both. And I don't see any contradiction. I don't understand why that's so hard for people to understand. We have these exaggerated polarities. You're either greedy and selfish, or you're an altruist, or you're either caring, you're either Saint Francis or Mother Teresa, or you're Adolf Hitler or Gordon Gekko. I mean, it's not fair to humanity. We're very complex beings, and people have lots of different motivations. And I just think I've always find it a silly argument in a way. I really don't even like to debate that one anymore. It always comes back, to my opinion, to just recognize human nature is far more complex than you give it credit for. And there's lots of different motivations, and we're not one-dimensional characters.
So in exploring those dimensions, I know we have a lot of supporters of the Atlas Society and others that are watching us on a variety of different social media platforms. So I want to encourage all of you to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to ask a question of John Mackey. Just type it into the comment stream and we'll get to as many of them as possible. So John, I do not take $1 a year salary as the CEO of the Atlas Society. I do have to shop at my local wonderful Whole Foods here in Malibu.
You need to make more money.
I find other ways. I mean, I do Airbnb. I find other ways to make money, but it is a nonprofit, and I'm constantly and trying to provide value to our shareholders, to our stakeholders, to our investors. And also because a lot of, like you're talking about the complexity of motivations, my motivation in taking this job at the Atlas Society wasn't monetary. It was that reading Ayn Rand had been really transformational to me. And I believe that Ayn Rand's fiction awakened many people to the splendor of entrepreneurship and also the dangers of bureaucratic encroachment. And you have mentioned that Atlas Shrugged is one of your favorite books, that you enjoyed it in part because of the story of heroic entrepreneurs like Dagny Taggart and Hank Rearden, who were, in your words, creating value, who were purpose driven. And so in your reading, would it be fair to say that some of those characters were in fact conscious capitalists?
Sure, I think it is fair to say that. I mean, the conscious capitalism it's on a continuum. And what I find interesting about those Randian characters is they were very purpose driven. It wasn't, they cared about money, but that wasn't what was really driving them. If you look at Henry Rearden, wanted to have the best steel mills in the world. He wasn't in it just for the money. Yeah, he wanted to make money too, but he also wanted to have innovation in steel. And Dagny Taggart wanted to operate the best railroads in the world. And John Galt, he invented a motor that could change the world. He just didn't want to have it stolen from him by the bureaucrats who would not let him realize the value that he was creating for the world. But the other characters are also interesting, but they are fictional characters. And I just find Dagny and Henry Rearden to be interesting characters and very complex characters who had a lot of different motivations. They're not simple, and which makes them good characters, right? That's why we love them. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Ayn Rand was definitely an inspiration for me. I said that publicly many times. And she was, I think, when I began to wake up from my democratic socialism days, and it was really when I started Whole Foods, I had to meet a payroll. And all of a sudden, people were calling me Darth Vader. I was greedy. I was selfish. I was gone off for the dark side trying to make money. And I thought, gosh, I'm still the same person I was before. But I'm trying to make money because I got to meet a payroll. And people that are so judgmental have probably never had to meet a payroll and don't understand. Once you start a business, the reality of the real world begins to encroach on whatever idealism you might have in your early 20s. I mean, I was 24, Renee was 20 when we started the business. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. And we could have easily failed early on. We lived in the store. I mean, we paid ourselves $200 a month. That's all we lived on. And we saved and worked hard and learned the business and became successful over time.
So I'd love to talk a little bit about both of these books. This is more recent, and you say that in some ways you feel like this is the better book. It's certainly a very, and I highly recommend both, but it's certainly a very practical book. What after you came out with Conscious Capitalism, did you find people were asking for more practical advice in terms of how to apply some of these principles?
Yeah, that's actually very perceptive, Jennifer. That's exactly what happened over time. I mean, Conscious Capitalism came out in 2013, and I lectured on it. I did a lot of speeches about it, and I got a lot of questions. And the entrepreneurs the business people wanted to know how to apply it. How do I manage this way? How do I lead this way? And we had 2 chapters on leadership in Conscious Capitalism. I think it's chapters 13 and 14. But we just scratched the surface. And I realized that we needed to operationalize it at a deeper level. And that's what we did. I mean, it's partly practical, but it's also, if you just look at the first 3 chapters, The first one is put purpose first. And how do you do that? And we give exercises in each chapter. The second chapter is lead with love. That's the one that more people want to talk about, because to them, that's a contradiction. They don't see how, because of the way people think about business, the metaphors we use to think about business are almost all hyper competitive.
Marshall.
Yeah, warlike, or their games, or their Darwinian survival of the fittest type things. And while competition is certainly an element of business, it's actually not what it's primarily about. Business is primarily about creating value for other people. And competition is one way we keep from being complacent, because people because you can't coerce people unless you're the government to do business with you. In Whole Foods case, we're a supermarket company, and we have lots of competition. And if people don't like our prices or our selection or our quality or our service or the way our stores operate, then they're free not to shop there. And of course, even though we're doing $21 billion a year in sales now, I mean, most people don't shop at Whole Foods. Most people choose other supermarkets. And that's the way it works. That's competition. We have to struggle every day to get better, lower our prices, improve our quality, give better service. And if you can do that, you'll get your share of the business. But it's not easy to do. And you have to work at it, because your competitors constantly copy the things that you're doing good, and you have to continue to innovate. And that's how progress is made, not only in supermarket business, but across the entire economy. That's what makes capitalism so amazing. It's because I like the way I've read all Deidre McCloskey's books. She's one of my heroes. And she called it innovism, was a better name for capitalism than capitalism. But I think even better than innovism is innovationism, because the real essence of capitalism is creating value for other people, for your customers. And you do that through innovations. Innovations is how you stay ahead of the competition. Innovations is how the world progresses. And that's what makes capitalism so amazing, is not just that it's voluntary exchange, not just that it's an ethical system, which it certainly is, but that it rewards innovation, successful innovation that gives people what they want. Nobody knew they needed a smartphone before they got one, and nobody knew they needed an iPod before they had one. But then think about it. There were no smartphones 20 years ago. None, zero, none in the entire world. And now everybody walks around hypnotized by their smartphones. We're obsessed with them. And that didn't even exist 20 years ago. There was no Uber 20 years ago. 20 years ago, Google was just really getting cranked up. There was no Facebook. The world is no Airbnb. That's capitalism. That's innovationism. It's the greatest system humanity's ever created. And Ayn Rand's, part of her genius was she saw that clearly, and she saw the way it could be and should be. And that's the beauty of something like Gulch, right? You can visit Gulch. Coaching is kind of a utopia of business people trading and creating value for each other, and not having parasites live off their labor. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand. She's had a big impact on me.
Yeah, and to me, her greatest contribution was her art, her narrative. And she talked about art as a recreation of reality according to an artist's values, and presenting an ideal and making it exciting and sweeping people up into the adventure of it. Now, in a recent debate on whether business should focus solely on profits, you did mention that when you talk to certain objectivists, you find yourself sometimes engaged in straw man arguments. Now, maybe it's because you're not talking to the right objectivists. So we'll hope to rectify that by having more conversations with you. But what is maybe, I was very generous of you to talk about the things that you derive a lot of benefit from in terms of Rand's literature, but where are some of the ways that you maybe diverge or find that it's less helpful?
Well, in my experience with people and with life, people's weaknesses come out of their strengths.
No, I could not agree with you more. They're just always like the light and the shadow. They're one and the same.
That's right. And so, and I've read at least two biographies on Ayn Rand, and so I think one of the things that's sort of not emphasized enough in the narrative about Ayn Rand is that you got to understand when she lived and what she was up against. She was, I mean, socialism, communism she came out of Russia. Communism had taken over Russia. And she comes in and she's working in Hollywood and she sees communism taking over Hollywood. And part of her personality is she's a provocateur. She just,
Courageous.
She's courageous, and she's not afraid. She was not afraid to call a spade as she saw it. And I think so. I think part of she reacted so strongly against the world that she found herself in the United States, and plus the adopted home, the purest example of capitalism. She saw it being corrupted, just as we see it being corrupted today, actually. So we need a Randian type character to arise now. But because I think she liked to be provocative, I think sometimes she exaggerated or overstated things to make a point. If I watch Ayn Rand in videos, I can just see that she liked shaking people's trees. And so she would say that you take selfishness, for example. So just I read Selfishness as a Virtue. I understand what she's trying to get to there, but really what she's talking about is a type of self-interest. Living your life for yourself is not a crime. It's not evil. It's a good thing, because who understands ourselves better than we do? And who can understand our motives better than ourselves? So the right to live for yourself is fundamentally a right. But then she makes a move just to shake people up. She calls it selfishness. But that's not really the definition of selfishness. Selfishness is a regard only for the self and to the exclusion of everyone else. But you look at the characters in her novels like Reardon and Dagny Taggart, they weren't selfish. They actually cared deeply about other people. And so they were self-interested. Self-interest is good. But because she liked to provoke people, she used that word selfishness. And it's not a whole lot different than Gordon Gekko saying greed is good. Well, greed is not actually good, but working hard and making money is good. But greed is like, selfishness means you don't care about others, you just care about yourself. And greed means that you keep taking a lot more for yourself, disregarding anybody else. We're taking words we're redefining words that you're never going to convince most people that selfishness is a virtue or greed is good. I understand in the capitalistic context of how you want to provoke people almost to say, well, you know what? It's okay to be selfish because through voluntary exchange, the world is a better place. And it's true. It's just that we're losing the argument by trying to use those words. But Rand was trying to be provocative because that's the kind of being she seemed to be. And now I see the Randians and objectivists, they switch over, well, benevolence is good, but altruism is bad. And we get to start using these words in contexts that most people don't understand. We do these special definitions for them. So as I've already said a couple times, I think human beings are complex. We are selfish and we are also altruistic. We are both. We love our children, but we sometimes are mad at our children. Sometimes we make sacrifices for people, and sometimes we take what we can get. We're just very complex beings that have a whole panoply of motivations and emotions. And the fully healthy human is going to reflect all of these things. So I always felt like Rand made a straw man argument putting selfishness versus altruism, because I've never met a pure altruist. I have met a few people that are sociopaths, basically, that are purely selfish. and I would not want to be friends with them. Most people are combinations of the two, and a good person is both self-interested and loving. I don't see any contradiction, so that's where I diverge a little bit there. I just feel like we're not going to win the capitalistic argument by arguing that selfishness is a virtue, because we're never going to convince people that's true, and we're doing damage trying to do so. We should just admit Rand was a genius and a provocateur, and but that she wasn't a perfect being, and she made some mistakes, and so like everybody else, I make plenty of mistakes too, and that's the way life is. I don't know if
Yeah, no, I hear you on that.
probably
I
going to
think
get a lot of hate mail, but that's the way it
no,
goes.
you're here at the Atlas Society. I think that it's a certainly fair debate to talk about whether the choice of the word selfishness, which is pretty firmly established and associated with a very narrow and short-sighted self-interest, as opposed to a longer term self-interest. I do believe that Rand was provocative. I do believe it's important to understand the context, including coming out of Soviet Russia. But I also think that I think that she was pointing to her emphasis on self-interest to a rather kind of revolution in the way that we approach ethics. You know, coming out of the Christian tradition, that that self-sacrifice, you know, that is an ideal. And who do we admire the most? You know, the one who sacrifices all. And I think that making an ethical defense of self-interest is something that's very important in terms of the defense of capitalism.
I totally agree. I don't think you could self-interest, enlightened self-interest, long-term self-interest is how we make progress in the world. It's a good thing. And I really think when she talks about selfishness as a virtue, she's talking about that type of self-interest.
She is, yeah.
And so I don't have a problem with that. I just think that it's by using that language in a particular way, it's given the enemies of capitalism a lot of ammunition to attack us with. And she didn't foresee
I think, yeah, that word again, you know, is debatable, but I guess, you know, and you and I have debated this in the past. I think that perhaps she has given some ammunition to the enemy, but the fact that she is constantly, I mean, here is this woman, immigrant, you know, achieved extraordinary professional success writing about female businesswomen and protagonists, you know, back in an age when this was absolutely unheard of, and yet she is reviled. No, you know, Google Doodle for Ayn Rand is in part.
She'd be canceled if she lived today. Make no mistake about it.
Oh, yeah, because she hit a nerve, you know, because she really was not just provocative, and she was, and we continue to try to carry on a bit of that tradition, but because she said, oh, no, I'm not going to give you the moral high ground. No, you are actually wanting to usurp that in order to control other people. And it's the great creators, you know, of the world who deserve our admiration. So anyway.
I'm a huge fan, but I also have, there's not any thinker out there that I 100% agree with. And that's the way it is. I mean, you read books, and if you have intellectual integrity, you learn what you can, and you admire the people that have, the intellectuals and the thinkers that have influenced me the most. I generally had disagreements with some of the things they said. And I mean, my wife and I don't agree about everything. I mean, that's the way humans are. We see things a little differently.
And believe me, John, I think that it's important to have open debate, to have dissent, to have disagreement. And if I didn't believe that this information was so important, I wouldn't be as critical as I sometimes am of an approach that deifies Ayn Rand, that treats her as infallible, that conflates the person with the ideas. We absolutely think that is not the way to go at the Atlas Society. That's why we pursue a big tent approach to objectivism. So, so anyway, I want to get to some of our audience questions. Also wanted to, the big news, this huge news, was the merger of Whole Foods with Amazon, which, really in the past year, we saw those benefits in terms of the company, probably, as well as to the consumers. I mean, the experience in terms of ordering from Whole Foods during the lockdowns was seamless, and I have to think that
It wasn't seamless. We had a lot of problems. I mean,
it was seamless in the Grossman household. But anyway,
no, I mean, it's just that we went from, like 2% of our sales to, at the peak, I think about 28% of our sales were being in delivery, and we had to make massive. We couldn't have done it without Amazon. Make no mistake.
That's what I'm saying. Is that just thank goodness you guys had that merger.
Yeah, and that, of course, that's believe it or not, it's hard to believe, but we're coming up on the 4th anniversary of that merger now. So there's an interesting new book out that I just read. It just came out a few weeks ago, and I instantly read it in just a few days, called Amazon Unbound, and it's by Brad Stone. He wrote a book called The Everything Store that came out, I don't know, back in 2012, I think. And this is kind of a continuation of that story, and it's pretty interesting. And of course, Whole Foods has got at least part of a chapter is dedicated to that merger. So it's been an interesting thing. Amazon, of course, is an amazing company, and it's now become one of the most reviled companies in the world by the intellectual class, because it's non-union, it's very disruptive. And Amazon is an incredibly innovative company, and in all the different areas, Jeff Bezos is clearly a genius, and he would make a great Randian character, by the way, because Jeff is so creative, and he's built a culture that's highly creative, and we're constantly inventing new things and innovating, and that's very threatening to people because it disrupts things. So think about the business is disrupted. It started out with books, but I mean, now it's just not just books, it's anything you want. And from Amazon, you can pretty much, maybe not at the height of the pandemic, but you can get it in no less than 2 days, oftentimes just 1 day. And you get into that habit of just, one click of getting something that you want immediately. That's been totally transformative. And then transforming cloud computing with AWS. That was a huge innovation that took a long time for Google and Microsoft to wake up to it, and now they're trying to catch up. But Amazon has a pretty substantial lead. And everything they get into, Amazon, they haven't been successful at everything, but the company is very creative, and I like that about the company. I like that about Amazon, and that's one reason they've been a good partner for Whole Foods. I'd love to be able to tell you some of the stuff that's going to be coming out in the next few years in the grocery business that Amazon's been working on, but that old joke I could tell you about, I'd have to kill you. In this case, I could tell you, but they'd probably kill me. So I'll better keep those secrets for now.
You have to tell me, but then you'd have to hire me. Scott has a question. It's kind of related to Amazon. Jeff Bezos, is he a friend of free market capitalism, or is he trying to capitalize on increased government regulations and control? That's a kind of...
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that
John,
question.
yeah,
that one's, I'll end up being a headline somewhere, so I'm not going to say.
Right, okay.
I'm not going to think about that. I'm not going to talk about the Washington Post, Jeff's politics. I don't want to talk about Amazon in general, except to say that we're happy we did the merger, and Whole Foods has learned a lot.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting that happened after the merger, Amazon said we wanted to raise our minimum wage for its employees to $15 an hour. Great for employees, great for the companies to an extent, I guess, though, as you mentioned, that raised your total labor costs by 250 million or so. Assume as a free market libertarian, you would not want to see federally mandated minimum wage, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about.
We already have a mandated minimum wage. You mean a $15?
$15, yeah, beyond the federal workforce.
Yeah, no, I oppose that. I mean, I'm pretty libertarian. I believe the market sets wages, and when you go in, that may not make any difference at all, or very little difference in New York City or San Francisco. But if you do that down in Mobile, Alabama, or in Mississippi, or some of the states that people are, you're gonna increase unemployment. You're gonna price a lot of people out of the marketplace, and that's just it's just a simple fact. The economy has demonstrated over and over and over again. And I always address that argument by saying, well, why raise it to $15? Why don't we raise it to $1,000 an hour? Wouldn't that be great? Everybody be making $1,000 an hour. Everybody be a millionaire, and the whole society would all be millionaires. That'd be so great, wouldn't it? And except, then people begin to think, well, gosh, that would be too expensive. Yeah. $15 an hour in some cases is too expensive. It's above what somebody's actually worth in the marketplace in terms of the productivity that they produce. When you raise wages artificially, we know businesses begin to substitute other labor-saving devices. A business like Whole Foods goes away from service to more self-service.
Right.
Automation. Yeah, and you begin to automate to eliminate labor, and it means young people who aren't worth $15 an hour, say they don't have enough productivity for it. They've got to learn their jobs, and might take a couple of years before they're worth more money to a business. They're oftentimes priced out of the marketplace. So we basically. You can always celebrate the people that have jobs, but they ignore the fact that it causes structural unemployment for other people who aren't actually creating $15 of economic value. And it's people that know anything about economics knows what I'm saying is true, or who are running businesses know what I'm saying is true, but intellectuals don't see it that way. They just see it in this morality play of good versus evil. That higher pay is good and lower pay is evil. It's done because people are greedy and selfish, and not at all. It's a competitive marketplace, and ultimately, competition in the market processes set compensation, or it should, if government wouldn't intervene in it. And when they intervene, they set up all kinds of distortions and disruptions. The market tries to work it out, and it does in a variety of different ways. But one of the ways it works it out is it uses less labor, because you made labor more expensive. If you make any type of thing, any input into a business more expensive, you're going to use less of it, because that's the way business works. That's the way economics work. That's the way the economy works. It's just economics 101. But so many of our government bureaucrats and politicians never took economics 101, or they read a Marxist version of it.
And they haven't been in business either, because
they haven't been meeting a payroll.
The other thing is that larger companies that maybe can make capital investments in automated checkouts or various other kinds of automation, or can even absorb those higher labor costs. I mean, somebody just trying to start a mom and pop store on the corner, and you're going to have a mandated.
You're absolutely right. It really punishes the small businesses. The larger businesses. I mean, we saw this with COVID when the government intervened so radically in the marketplace and pretty much shut down a lot of economic activities. The bigger corporations had the working capital to sustain that loss of business. Starbucks is still going strong, but the small restaurants and small coffee shops, a lot of them couldn't sustain. They didn't have the working capital to be shut down for several months, and they've gone out of business. And that's a great tragedy that has been the harm that this has done to people's lives is practically immeasurable. And
I
those
believe
stories
it's,
are not being told. I've had a lot of friends that go bankrupt in the last year. It's terrible.
well, you've been living in a very interesting place. You've lived your whole life in Texas. You founded Whole Foods there. You've experienced this year of lockdowns from both an interesting professional vantage and an interesting geographical vantage. Texas, of course, was among the first states to lift all of the COVID restrictions, which was roundly criticized as an example of Neanderthal thinking and all kinds of predictions about surges and
they were all those predictions were all wrong.
They never, materialized. So what do you make of this, John? I mean, is this politics? Is this people
Politics.
trying to?
It's politics. That's what I think.
How so?
Want to get Trump out of office, and a lot of people like to tell other people what to do, and
Control.
control. We've never done this before. I mean,
Never. I mean, and we've had other pandemics. I mean, we had the Hong Kong flu during the Woodstock era.
in 1967, we've had a number of flus. Now, this one was worse than, I mean, just by the death toll, even if you adjust for population, it was worse than the Hong Kong flu or the 1967 flus. But it's not nearly as bad as the 1918, 1919 pandemic. That was far more destructive. I mean, basically, I believe that human beings are responsible for themselves and that people are not stupid and that people will take the necessary precautions, but they have to get on with their lives. I don't think, clearly from the very beginning, I was opposed to these lockdowns. And I followed with great interest what libertarians like Jeffrey Tucker were writing.
Oh, he's been a leader. We've had him on the show.
He's very courageous and very inspiring to me. I liked the output they were doing and personally made a donation to that organization, mostly because they had such courage in facing these, standing up to the mob, basically. So, I'm so happy, Jennifer, because Whole Foods is lifted. Now you can shop in our stores where it's permitted, like Texas and Florida. You don't have to wear a mask.
Not in California.
Not in California, but no mask. Our team members, we are asking them to have proof of vaccination right now, and if they do, they can be maskless. I'm maskless. I had my second vaccination back in February, so I feel free again. Honestly, I feel
I'm so glad.
I feel like a year of my life was taken away from me, and I wasn't very happy about it. So
yeah, I mean, and the other thing that goes unsaid all too often, I spent a good part of my career in nutrition. You devoted your life, your purpose, the purpose of Whole Foods is helping people to nourish their bodies and to be healthier. Just so many of the bad outcomes that we've experienced in terms of COVID is because of obesity, lack of fitness, people not.
And that's a story that doesn't get told. It's a story that doesn't get told. That the reality is that, you look statistically, and this is not just across the United States, it's just that we are the most obese nation in the world. But I don't know, like 80% of the deaths have been for people over the age of 65, and almost a phenomenal 99% have been to people that have underlying health conditions, most commonly obesity, but then also frequently type 2 diabetes and clogged arteries and compromised immune systems in general. People that are, I'm not saying you couldn't get sick from COVID. I knew a lot of friends who were healthy and got sick, but they recovered. Just like you might get the flu and recover, or you might get shingles and recover. It's a nasty disease because this virus is one that humans really hadn't built any antibodies up for. So we've had to, but in general, I was just reading about Uruguay was being hailed as this great nation that did all the right things, and they were keeping COVID was being kept back. And guess what? I mean, viruses travel, and it got in there despite all the lockdowns, and now they've got the highest death rate in the world, which is a terrible tragedy. And for all of those preventions, it didn't stop the virus from eventually coming in. And that's the reality. And what we needed to do, in my opinion, was just take common sense precautions, but each person should be responsible for themselves and their families and do what they feel is right and best, and not try to force everyone into some type of living pattern. It's a totalitarianism. We got a nice taste for a year of what it would be like to live in a totalitarian society.
Unfortunately, the
I hated it.
totalitarians did too.
I hated it. I hated this last year. Worst year of my life, without a doubt.
Yeah, it was very difficult to maintain, your sense of a benevolent universe, and just a feeling of hopelessness. But also, I will say, I believe in gratitude, and I believe in trying to find ways to strengthen your agency, and also to innovating. And these webinars that we've had, we started doing them. Jeffrey Tucker was, I think, our second or third guest, and so, yeah, there's always a way forward. So we just have 2 or 3 more minutes.
Okay.
John, time always flies when I speak with you. We talked about the untold story of health and COVID. Are there any other untold things that you'd like to say, or maybe?
Too broad. So you should ask me a specific question.
Okay, tell us about the next one coming up after this, your next book.
My next book is I'm going to tell the story of Whole Foods. It's got to be told. I'll do it from. A book I recommend. It's probably the best business book I ever read. I just love Phil Knight's memoir on Shoe Dog on Nike. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was such a great book, and that's my goal. I want to write a book as good as Shoe Dog, and that's the next book. And
working title?
The whole story is the working title.
I like it. All right. Well, John, I know I'll see you in South Dakota, but I am going to try to get our schedules together and see you.
I'm in Austin, you say, in June. We can connect up for lunch, or coffee, or sometime. We'll do it.
That would be wonderful. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all that you do. And also, John, if you do a store visit in Malibu,
I actually haven't seen that store yet. I haven't actually visited the Malibu store. But I'm waiting for was it June 15th? You guys are going to start opening up? I got a ton of friends in LA, so I'm going to come visit here sometime in the summer. I'll get to.
Okay.
I'll probably get into that Malibu store since I haven't been there.
Great. Well, I'll coordinate that as well. I'd love to do a book party for you for this guy and gather some of the libertarians in our area.
I did a whole virtual book tour. I actually never, because the book came out during peak COVID, right? So doing a virtual book tour is completely different. You don't ever have to leave, but in reality, it's very hard to sell books if you're not doing them in person. That's one of my discoveries. Even that I did the Joe Rogan podcast, and I don't know, something like 10 million people saw that podcast, and we talked about the book, but it got a temporary spike that lasted about a day, and that was it. It's very hard to sell books virtually. That's my conclusion.
Well, I love also the narrator that you had for this one. The Audible version is excellent.
I will tell you a story. That guy is one of my favorite narrators from all. I listen to a lot of Audible books.
He sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's done. If you look at he's done a ton of my favorite books. He did the Da Vinci Code and several. He does a lot of thriller books. So they said he was available, and I said he's like one of my favorite narrators. So I love the fact that he did it. Yeah, very grateful.
Good. I highly recommend. So wonderful. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Jennifer.
See you
Take
soon.
care. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.